Welcome to Tequila in Your Tea. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Veena. Veena Kenoah is what I usually go by, but if you do a deep dive, you'll find me as Veena Sanchez. Of course, today we have the wonderful Jeremy Moore. Okay, you may know him as Remy, you may know him as Jeremy, but his face is not new to these cameras, okay? He knows what he is doing here today. Just to give you some backstory, we're going to be diving deep into a topic that I don't think I'm ready for. But fair warning, I did this to myself. So, yeah, I think you are the perfect person to discuss this with. You're someone who, if you don't know, Jeremy is an ordained pastor, has been for the last 6 years. I specifically know him from my home church, which is Freedom Church of Philadelphia. And of course, you've just held so many important spaces within the church. But to be clear, Jeremy has not only been creative pastor and worship pastor, but site pastor, marketing, branding director, just to name a few of the roles he has held with the church. And of course, he also is a solo artist in his own right. This man can sing the house down. Not only has he done his own solo work, he is coming out with a new project as Remy. He's also starting a new project called Mesa. Design? What? I already find you as someone who dresses so well, who always looks good. And so to know that there's a potential that I can have a little bit of that flow into my life. Amen. So, yeah, just to know that I'm having this conversation with you today kind of puts me at ease.
Yeah.
Because you've gone through it so much.
Yeah.
Not to say that's a good thing, okay?
Yeah.
So you know. Death and grief is the topic. And yeah, it's something that we both understand well, but you have coached people through this so much. You have spoken about it. You have shared well. So hopefully he'll keep me together today.
Or not.
Or not. You know, that could happen too. I prepared for crying. Okay. Yeah. No mascara. All that being said, I don't want to discredit just how well educated you are as well. Real talk. Okay, so pastor has, lived out here. He has a BS in applied mathematics and a BA in African American studies with a concentration in public policy. He is someone who is more than qualified to not only counsel and share, but also teach on so many levels. So I just say thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only way to get into this topic is to just
dive right in.
Yeah. So I first question, what was your first experience with loss? And who did you lose?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And you're right. There's no easy way to dive in other than dive in. And that's kind of what grief and death is like. It just hits you, right? It's sudden. But my first experience with death was back in 1990. I was a young wee lad, and I lost my father to I don't know if the way he died matters, but for my story it does.
Yeah.
But he died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And so the story of that day is still a core memory for me of him dropping me and my brother off to school, saying, I love you, which was atypical. And, having that moment, and I look back at that, and then, having my aunt come pick us up from aftercare and coming home to a bunch of people at our home and seeing the shock and the horror and the tragedy that was already around without knowing what was happening. And so that was my first experience with loss, was the loss of my father at the age of 9. So, yeah.
Jeez. I warned you Okay, I did. Just to know how traumatic I can picture that being.
Mm-hmm.
Only because my experience with loss did not have choice involved, if I can say it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
I think when there is choice involved, sometimes it can hurt in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
My first experience with loss, to be honest, was my grandmother. She had stayed with us for a while, but she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. And I do remember being young. I was like 4. And when she had passed, I was sad, but it didn't hit me the same way.
Yeah.
Because there was a certain level of preparation. What I was upset about was not being able to say goodbye. My father actually didn't want me to see the body. She had passed while I was away at school. And so they just made sure that her body was gone before I came home. And similar to a lot of people in the house and all this kind of stuff. And it was just like, what is going on?
Right.
And it's disorienting when you're young.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, I think my biggest loss was when I lost my mother. And I always, and because I've talked about it somewhat before, I always associate that with the biggest change that I had in my life and in my faith walk.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in a faith-oriented space. I'll say it that way. Spent a lot of time in church. My mother was someone who was always a believer and someone who talked about faith and healing, but she was dealing with cancer. It's like, oh, okay, well, you have to deal with the practicals of cancer as well.
Yeah.
And for 6 years, it was a very tough struggle. She didn't have a popular cancer, which if you know what I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
She dealt with bladder cancer, and it made it very, very tough to really kind of help her through it, because I was also going through middle school and high school.
Yeah.
But now I'm also a primary caretaker. And then when she's a few surgeries in and she's also just like going through extreme bouts of pain, you're trying to assess whether there's more that you can do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she's like, but I'll be fine. I'm going to be good.
Yeah.
God's got this. God's got me. And yeah, it was when I first went to school and, of course, went to a Christian college and went away for that first year. And she's like, I'll be fine. It's fine. And then I come back on break and she has a whole breakdown. And she is talking about how she wished I had never left because my dad doesn't take care of her the same way. Just long story short, screwed me up.
Yeah.
To return back after that year within a few months. And now she's in hospice. And now she's passed away. And it didn't add up. And it didn't add up for a lot of reasons. One, because she didn't share much about how this was happening. And she spoke so highly in faith terms that a lot of people were actually surprised that she had passed away and that it was as bad as they thought it was, or finding out that she was in hospice at all. Like, why are we just finding this out, kind of thing. So it ended up helping me to shift. I won't say necessarily in a positive way. I didn't react positively. We're going to say
most
that.
don't. It's
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it was something that caused me to question who I was, how I behaved, how I thought, how I felt about everything. Because there was so much suffering that led up to her passing as well.
Yeah. It
made me kind of freak out. Like, just to be real simple. I was just like, what? It didn't equate. So I can imagine how everyone's story with loss is different, especially like a first loss, that monumental kind of core memory change. At the same time, I think each loss is slightly different.
Yeah.
Everyone reacts slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna talk about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Let's dig in a little bit. I kind of already hinted at the fact that I did not react well, but especially knowing that it happened to you, that first one when you were a child,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like you coped well? Did you feel like you were just a hot mess? Like, what was your vibe?
I would say yes and yes. I
Amen.
mean, you know, given the circumstances, you kind of talked about it. I think culturally,
Mm.
if I can speak so plainly,
Yeah.
Black people don't do well
Nope.
with like just sharing emotions and talking and being vulnerable. You know, and I grew up in the South, so it's like, you know, particularly even the things surrounding my dad and his depression and the addictions and what was going on, it's just like wasn't part of it. You know, it was just like, we're gonna be okay. But like, no, we're not okay. We know, and it's like I'm seeing everybody fall apart around me. Me and my brother are having to kind of take shifts at night with my mom. Like, she would just break down crying, and we'd just be in our room like, well, who's gonna go now? You know, and it's like we gotta be now the men of the house. And so all of this role shifting and that was happening, and also like the discounting even at a very young age of what I understood and what I saw. And so, you know, my family didn't tell us that my dad died of suicide. A friend told me, because it was in the newspaper, right? It was in the obituary that was out that was printed. And so the community knew, but we didn't know. And so I would say I coped well in that, like, when you deal with a loss, you do have to, you know, it's one of those, I'm sinking or I'm swimming here, right? I have to show up in a different way. And I think that's maybe one of the benefits of being also growing up in a village of Black people. It's just like there's a sense of resiliency. We got a bounce back spirit, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it's just like I'm watching that happen around me, and so you just adapt to the culture around you. So I would say me and my brother, so I'm a twin. Just, you know, we didn't. I think we showed up the way people were expecting us to show up. So externally, I think it helped our family move forward. That, you know, that my uncles feel like, okay, these boys are doing well, you know. And because my dad, his name is Roy Thomas Moore. If everybody knows me, my name is Jeremy Thomas Moore Thomas. My grandfather was Leroy Thomas Moore. My great grandfather was Roy Thomas Moore. We were Thomas Moore boys. Like, so the fragility of like, are these Thomas Moore boys gonna be okay, was like around in that space. And so we looked like we were okay. We were taking care of our mom. We were, you know, being strong on the outside. But no, I wasn't okay. I mean, when I look back, I'm like, yeah, it looked like I was okay, but I was just perpetuating bad coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And so I dealt with a lot of torment. One of the things, as I tell this story and people like freak out, they're like, really, this really happened? But we spent days at the funeral home, like, for some reason. It felt like days, and it may have only been one day, but it felt like we were just there. Like, we were playing around my dad's body, you know, like just because where else were we going to be except with our mom? But she's taking care of all of the, you know, all of the things that come along with arrangements, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and I remember the night of my dad's funeral, and everybody's still at the house, and like, when we go to bed, and I get like, when I tell you I felt it, it was like, I have a bunk bed, and I'm literally laying on the bed, and like, and you know, you sleep with your legs together, and there's a little bit of space. Literally my dad's body is like rolling up beside me. Now, and I say that to say this is
Mhm.
like a spiritual torment, right?
Yeah.
But if I spread my legs out over the bed, then he can't roll up beside me. So I dealt with this for over a decade. Like I would never sleep in a queen size bed or in any space that wouldn't allow me to stretch my legs all across where I was sleeping. But what I realized is because I had no closure.
Yeah.
And so we can talk about that later. But that when I say like, man, I thought I was coping well, but like I'm dealing with torment, silent torment that nobody knows, but I'm not sharing with my mom because she's going through so much.
Yeah.
And so I'm showing up for her as a well-adjusted kid who's resilient, but really internally there's so much going on, you know?
Like just listening to you talk about that level of torment, it's especially when you are at a young age.
Yeah.
That affects how you think about the entire world.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, I mean, the sense of awareness of especially when you don't have an outlet to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, or can you even share it? And not even understanding, like if I would have had someone to share that with who's been through, like, you know, we talk about like I've coached people through these spaces. If I would have had somebody who's like, okay, what you're dealing with is actually unprocessed emotions and feelings around this, and so let's get you into a space to deal with this. It would have been, you know, I would have been able to actually deal with it. But then that's the thing about grief. I always tell people when I'm talking to them about it is grief is a normal response. And I want to highlight the word normal. It's our body responds normally to it, and there's a stigma around it, but it's really grief's cousins. You know, we always got those ratchet cousins that we don't want to invite anywhere. You know what I'm saying? But it's the depression, the anger, the bitterness, these stages of grief that they invite themselves to the party. Those are the things that we run from. And so then we actually don't actually get to grief because we don't understand those things we can deal with. Grief is something we should allow ourselves the process of going through, and it's healthy to go through it. And what does that look like? And even as a 4-year-old or as a person in middle school and high school, losing your mom, or a 9-year-old losing their father, like there's still a healthy way and a normal way to go through that and to take away the stigma of like just stuffing it down, you know, and you're never going to be at a place where you're like ready to deal with it. Yeah. You just got to deal with it. And it's hard to say it to people who have ever seen somebody actually go through it well. Yeah.
1,000%.
Yeah.
It's interesting because just the way you had said about, you know, grief being a normal process and we're supposed to go through it and you need those safe spaces, it does lean back to me for the community that we just so happen to come from, where there is a stigma around the not only processing of grief openly, but also seeking assistance.
Yes.
If you have heard any episode of this podcast, we stand for therapy around here. We do, because it's a requirement. As someone who is trying to deal with parts of that grief even now as a 31-year-old, it's necessary. It's necessary to have those spaces, even those paid spaces, because like you said, when you're talking to someone who just doesn't know, it's not even the fact that they can't help you. It's the fact that they have no frame of reference. It can be traumatic to them listening with untrained ears.
Yes.
And I know that when I was going through these deaths in my life, there was a lot of times where people were just like, I'm sorry, but I don't know what to say or do. So they would kind of walk away from the space, which is fine.
Yeah.
Like I understood it, but at the same time, it left me feeling very lonely in the space. And I know that I got stuck specifically in the anger phase for a good chunk of time. And that's because when I was in the midst of grief, I believed my father was in the midst of grief as well. But his was reading differently. His was very much a let's pack it up and move on as quickly as possible. And when I was dealing with depression and couldn't get out of bed for a while, it was right around that time where I guess he decided that he just needed to move on. So I remember it was very abrupt. He'd asked me to do dishes. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I'll just go do dishes. Just give me a few minutes. And when I went to go do the dishes, like as I was walking towards it, he was like, I think you should find somewhere else to live. Just very plain, very simple. And so it was twofold. It wasn't just the fact that like, oh, wow, my father's like, just be out, figure it out, be out. It was also the fact that the only person I thought, even though we weren't as close as I would have liked, he was still my dad. I still lived with him. He was there with me growing up. The only person I thought I'd actually really connect to and relate with on her loss and the whole process leading up to her loss was just like, nah, I'm good. And I'm done with this. I'm done with you. Could you just move on? So once the anger phase kicked in, I was stuck there twofold. Not only am I angry with the universe that my mother is gone when I was technically preached to for the last 6 years that she wouldn't. And there was the laying of hands. There was the we're going to believe by faith. And not saying that all of those things are wrong. It was just that it was not met with the balance of, but his will be done. Even if she doesn't stay here, how do we make sure that there is support and closure? Instead, not only did I lose the person I was closest to in the world, but then I lost any sort of family structure or support. And I'd hinted at this before, but it was also such a secretive suffering because it was 3 or 4 years in before she started having to tell people that she was dealing with cancer. She was already post 2 surgeries. She had already had an episode with a second round of chemo that put her in the hospital. And they were just like, oh no, she's going into failure and all this stuff. Like, it almost killed her. So now they've switched her to radiation, all this kind of stuff. And she's losing weight. So everyone says, oh, you look great. All this crap. And to know that the entire time I'm going through this emotional roller coaster and not allowed to share. Going to school and not telling teachers, counselors, friends, anything. It was
being you're training yourself to not to share all the things you're dealing with.
Correct. And then you're like, okay, but I'm holding it all together for this particular end result. And that particular end result didn't happen. And then everyone you held it together for or with is now like poofed. So you're just kind of like, oh, so I'm left with all this on my own.
Wow.
And then you got to go somewhere and figure it out. And well, you're an adult now. Okay. But yes, but I was not prepared for that. I was prepared to be someone's caretaker and to go to school and figure it out, pull it together. Why'd you have trouble in school that first year? Oh, because I was an emotional wreck after my mother had a breakdown. And I couldn't mentally recover. I couldn't focus knowing that me choosing to go to school 2 hours away was causing her to suffer. And there was no one to speak to that understood. Even when I had the blessing of having family say like, hey, just come stay with us for a little while, it was still technically an unsafe space at the time. Because they were going through things. And then you have this situation where not only am I grieving, but I'm also being encouraged to just pull it together and be an adult and make all of your first steps, finding your first really well-paying jobs and like going for like your life, do your life. okay, but I'm still stuck here in the
Yeah.
life that I was supposed to have.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to be here.
Yeah.
Like, everything's off. But no one wants to talk to me about, like, why this is my life now.
Yeah.
It's just over, and I'm just supposed to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I found, like you said, yes and yes. I was coping in the sense of trying to keep it together, but I was furious.
Yes. So you actually just said it in a perfect way. You were coping and not grieving.
Correct.
And that's so interesting. I think I don't want to just keep saying culturally, but I think in general, people can easily figure out how to cope because we're natural repressors. We can get up and move on. We can ignore, we can not talk about things, but like grief actually is a process and it allows you to grow. So you are stuck in coping mode and not ever being able to, and that's what everyone's been telling you to do. Just pull it together. You just pull it together. You cope during her suffering. Now you can cope again, but never really dealing with the
Time
process.
will heal all wounds, all that stuff. But
coping does not heal wounds.
No, it doesn't.
No, there is a process. Yeah. And I know pastor way, I would just say this, but I mean, I think anybody, even if you don't go to church, it's like the benefit of, I love the scriptures and the Beatitudes. It's, blessed are those who mourn.
Yeah.
For they will be comforted. And it's not just like comfort, like I'm going to give you a hug.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's literally like the God doing a work in you. That's what he's saying. They will be something else, something that they haven't been before. This, if you're going to grow from a loss, you actually need to start the mourning process. And this is something a lot of us aren't equipped to do. Yeah. And that's why, like you said, I'm such an advocate for therapy, but just being around people who have been through the process and know, like, no, you need to actually mourn. You need to let yourself feel these things and let somebody help you get through them.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a growth process for you. Yes, you will get stuck. And yes, it will start to leak out into every area of your life. Correct. If you don't deal with it. And so like some of the byproduct of that will be people who don't understand are going to be maybe tired of you or like exasperated by your life, you know what I mean, or where you are.
Yeah.
But
or why are you randomly crying?
Right?
Like
yeah.
I'm just talking to you about school or something and be connected, and I just start bawling my eyes out. Like it just seems so emotional or fragile, and you're like, well, I don't know what to do with this.
But when you have all those emotions and those things in here, like your vessel isn't but so large.
Yeah.
And you can repress as long as you think you can, but it's gonna leak out. Yeah. Whatever's in the inside of you is gonna leak out in some way. And so
might leak a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. And I could always tell post conversations because I was living with other family. They were usually willing to have a conversation with me about like, hey, we just want to talk to you about your, the way you've been reacting lately, or how you've behaved in a certain way, or why are you staying out late now? Like that was never you. You were the golden child, and we're just nervous for you. But there was never, and not to fault them. It's an understanding that they didn't know what to do with it. Technically, they were grieving in their own way because they lost an aunt or a sister or whatever.
Yeah,
and there was very much this understanding that they were concerned for me, but didn't know how to fix it. And so all of their ways of trying to fix it were as if grief wasn't involved.
Yeah.
Like if I was just like a teenager going through it. But I went through my teenager phase. I was good.
Yeah.
I had no issues. I wasn't wild and reckless and doing anything. It's now.
Yeah.
It is this.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is because a lot of them have never made space for them to deal with their own grief in times.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
they're just doing what they did, so they're passing it on. And of course, sitting up here trying to not get super emotional about things, but it was definitely a time where I felt my most lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's because my own emotions were not under my control.
Yeah.
As someone who is always very well adjusted, behaved, polite, I was always in a mental space of everyone, you know, just come together.
Yeah.
My family used to joke and say I had on rose-colored glasses, the whole kumbaya thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now I find myself short-tempered,
Mm-hmm.
short-fused.
Yep.
I find myself crying without
Yeah.
anything of real,
Yeah.
I'd say like actual target towards the subject coming up.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you why, but
Yeah.
I can't stop them either.
Yeah.
That's when I first started to have panic attacks.
Mm.
And there was this level of anxiety and I couldn't tell you where it was coming from.
Yeah.
As an adult now, it's like I can try and put it towards possibly the fact that I didn't know how to function in my new space.
Mm.
And then also the expectation that I should do better or do well, and feeling like I'm failing at it constantly. But then there was also this underlying now, oh wait, I have to deal with the fact that I don't think that the promises of God are true for me.
Yeah.
And that healing is not for something for me or my family.
Yeah.
And that all of these things that I've believed over the years is not true for me. So my foundation is now rotting.
There you go. I hope everybody who's listening gets the click of all of those things coming together. Because a lot of people, even when you're talking about your family, looking at some of the fruit of your life, and that's what they can easily, like, they can see, but not the root. It's some things like grief. I mean, all that stuff starts internally, right? And and then you just said it when you're like, my foundation is crumbling. That foundation you can't see.
Nope.
Everybody can look at your shutters, can look at your window, can look at your paint, right? And be like, oh, you know, your paint's chipping, and you're like, that's not the issue, really, right? It's like we're talking about foundation issues that people can't see until the house starts falling down, and then they start to address some of the things they can see, but you're like, no, but the house is still crumbling. You can't dress up a broken house. And so you're talking about some things that grief was doing in you internally. Doubt has a root in your soul, and fear,
straight up fear,
right? And it's like that is not something that people can see, and you don't really also understand all of the ways that it can impact how it gets expressed. You don't even know. Like you said, you can just have outbursts of crying.
Correct.
You don't know. That's just an expression. You don't even know. Is that coming from the doubt? Is that coming from the fear? Is that coming from...
It was guilt.
You know, it's right.
As an adult now,
yeah,
I know that it was tied to anytime someone would ask me about my future and what I wanted to do with my future now. Like, I didn't have whole plans before this. It was attached to the fact that when I first started to do things for myself, I wanted to go to this school. I had gotten all of the scholarships to go. Like, I had really put in all the effort. And that first half of the semester was all right. It was pretty good.
Yeah.
But when I had to come home during that break, and there was, I wish I could erase the memory. But to feel my mother's arms grab me and start crying about how she wished I had not left, I just ruined a certain level of guilt that the only reason she got to suffer even more was because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And the reason why she ended up in hospice right after I got back was because I had left her for those 9 months I was away. And to not have any sense of closure in regards to that, there was nothing but like, no, it's my fault.
It's your fault, yeah.
Like, it's my fault that I'm here. It's my fault that my life is ruined, that her life is gone. And even though obviously it made no true logical sense, like, I'm not a doctor. Cancer is not something I have cured.
Right,
so like, forget all that. There was an understanding that I could have made her life easier, or if I had pushed further, I could have given her some of the things that she wanted out of life.
Mm.
She really wanted to travel. She had a degree in interior design. She wanted to do all these wonderful things. But because she was a mother to me, she made lots of sacrifices. And as a daughter to her, with a very short period of time, did I do enough? And so, yeah, anytime someone would ask me about what I was doing with my life, tears. And no control, no connection.
Yeah.
But as I got older, I had to realize, I was like writing down why I cried today. Like, what did they ask me?
Yeah.
Oh, they asked me if I was going back to school. Or they asked me if I was going to do this one thing. Or if they asked me why I didn't know how to balance a checkbook or do budgeting. Or like they asked me something that has to do with, why am I here?
Yeah.
And I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of anxiety around you were saying, I'm not, obviously this turned into a therapy session, I love it, but the idea around the root of anxiety around responsibility now, because
heavy in our community.
And it's like you have this, all of a sudden, this imposed sense of responsibility put on you that ended in not the way that you thought it was going to. And then, so this, you said, this fear, guilt, doubt, this sense of failure over something you're responsible for, over something that like, is this really my responsibility? This shouldn't even be. Now it's playing itself out in your life in the simplest of things. Like you said, balancing the checkbook, like it's, and you're like wondering where this anxiety is coming from, but it's like really, it started, that's what I'm saying, grief, if it's unprocessed, it's like, it invites all of its cousins start to come. And so, and I just preached about this actually this past Sunday. Just this unprocessed feelings can ultimately become the worst enemy of our soul. And it's because of that, because once it starts to take roots, it spreads. Yeah. And you don't even know, now you're dealing with all these other layers of things when really, man, it would have been nice for you to be able to have shared back then what you were sensing, be able to lay out in front of somebody with some vulnerability, like, I feel like this is my fault. To be able to share that with somebody and somebody be able to walk you through the grief process, to be able to talk through that.
It's interesting you say it that way, because I've told a few people just over the years, is I feel like God has put that person in my path for a reason, to say like, you're not going to go as far as I did because I'm here. God's allowed me to be in your path to make sure that you have that space that I felt like I didn't have. Yeah. So you can freak out or have more emotional trips, or you can talk about the person that you've lost without everyone else saying like, oh, this is getting weird and uncomfortable. So that way you don't have to go as far as I did. Have your moments, do what you got to do, but you don't have to trip over the same things that I tripped over, all because I felt so alone, all because I felt like I was never able to process and that no one understood. And that's the beauty of it. It was, for me, deciding that I was going to try and do my best to stand in the gap. Not be perfect. Not be someone who is a trained therapist. Like, I'm not going to do that. But I am going to make sure that I can be that safe space. And if I'm like, hey, you need that therapist, let's do that. You need to pay for this trauma work, because it's trauma work. Then I can at least encourage that. They don't have to feel as alone as I did. And that's where I can say, like, it's actually helped me to heal somewhat, to be in this space and not be as broken, because I wasn't able to afford therapy for a while, ma'am. Okay, we were out here just like wading through the waters. And as I'm still working through it, still processing, still doing therapy, I'm still able to be an open space for other people, even if it's just to help lead them to someone who is more trained than I am, who is better prepared for it. I guess for me, that would kind of lean into my next questions, which would be, what were some of your steps towards being as healed as you are now? I will not say healed from loss fully, because I do think that's technically a lifelong process.
Yeah.
Because there's always points and moments, connections where it's going to come up.
Yeah.
And you have to address what it feels like for that moment.
Yeah.
But you're healed enough now to, one, be able to counsel people in it. Two, be able to talk about it publicly like this without having like some freaking
I'll cry later. So
moment outburst kind of vibes.
Yeah.
But there's obviously either steps you took, relationships that you've had, coaching, mentorship, whatever, pieces that brought you here. I always try to talk about it because it's completely different for everyone, but somebody needs to know where they should start.
Yeah.
Somebody's stuck in the same space that I was. Where should they start?
Man, I mean, it hasn't been like a very linear
Amen
process. And so I can talk about a couple different steps. My family, and it wasn't because I wanted to, it was, we kind of were forced to go through family counseling. And which was very helpful because I don't think my mom would have done it otherwise. But just because of some other instances of trauma, and I don't want to share all the details of that here, but we had to go through family therapy, and for a while, and it was really helpful because I think this was the first time I cried in front of my mom, and then somebody asking me how I feel, like really genuinely wanting to know. So it was very helpful. It wasn't until I got into college that I was dealing with a lot of anger, a lot of rebellion. Even though I had just became a Christian right before I went to college, and it was in the group of it was our sister church from Freedom Church, actually. I was going there at UNC, and the guy that was mentoring me was very much like, you need inner healing in your soul. And I was like, whatever. I mean, it's like,
yeah, it's like a concept. It's like,
right.
Whatever.
And the way he framed it is how I frame it now. It's just like, you need to be whole. Whatever God has for you in the future, whatever you feel like your future is, you need to show up becoming a whole person.
Correct.
Not a fractured person, because it's just gonna impact really how you show up in your spaces. And I'm trying to like churchify it, right? Because I feel like I want to make sure it's as broad as possible for people. In my space, it was definitely, it's talking about, wherever you're gonna go from here, you're gonna deal with that, whatever that is. It's ugly. You don't see it, but it's ugly. And that process for me, they call it inner healing. And it was a process of like going back to traumatic moments. And for me, it was, but now Jesus is with you. What is he saying? What are you hearing? How would you pray if you're there now with your younger self?
Yeah.
What would you say? Knowing what you know now, knowing what you know about the scriptures, knowing what you know about God, what would you say to yourself? And in my instance, it was, Jesus is walking alongside you now. Yeah. You're in, and he's there with you at this casket. What is he saying? And it was the first moment for me that I realized that the reason why my dad, because up to this point, I'm still like, so thankful that in school, in dorms, they give you bunk beds still. Yes. Because I'm like, I'm like, this is great. This is all the space I need.
Yes.
And it was still a very much so like a quiet torment. And but it was somebody who saw and was like, something's going on in your soul. What's going on? It's the first time I was like, a safe space. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
Really, people need safe spaces
Yeah.
to share what's going on. Not just to share, but so somebody who has insight can be able to say, this is what I believe this is. Now, here is the next step for you. And so that was helpful for me. It was just like, okay, this is a spiritual torment. There's been an open door from this tragedy, and it is now just a stronghold in your life, and you need to deal with that. And God wants rest for you, Jeremy. Like, you should be able to sleep at night. You haven't had any closure from your father's passing. And it was all these things, and it was just like, but part of that also was why. So I'm like, what? And I know maybe hopefully it's not too overly spiritual, too deep for the people who are listening, but I'm just talking with you, my friend. So I just want you to understand what's going on. But
please.
There, I was holding on to so much anger, so much bitterness. I didn't want to be anything like my dad. I hated him for like the way he said goodbye to us. Was it us? Were we too much for him? All those things. And so, but with that, all these questions being unanswered, all these spaces, and it's the thing, like, they were never going to be answered.
Correct.
But it was a way for my whole body to hold on to him.
Correct.
And so I had just been coping and not actually grieving and going through the process of mourning his loss so that I could grow and God could take that experience and form me into the person that he needed me to be. And so I'm sitting there literally with my eyes closed on a couch, very similar to this one, on the couch with my eyes closed. It's like, Jesus is with you. What is he saying? And it was like, you need to forgive him. You are a redeemed version of him. You are like him in the best possible ways. And it was all these things. It was like, the mourning him is gonna actually keep me connected to him.
Yeah.
What I'm doing now is not keeping me actually connected to him in the ways that are gonna help me grow, and they're gonna help me like look back and see the humanity of him, and really, it was a lot of things that were going on in that moment. And so I just remember it so vividly of walking up to the casket, Jesus holding my hand. I mean, like, I'm with you. You are not unfathered. You don't have to be. You, but you need to be fathered to grow, to become the person that that I want you to be, that I haven't left you. I haven't abandoned you. I know the plans I have for you. All these things now I know them, but now I'm hearing Jesus actually say that in the place that I actually needed to hear it, right? There aren't just like, scriptures, but there's like, okay, Jesus is saying to me in my moment of pain, in the place that has a stronghold over my whole life for the last decade. And it was literally breakthrough. Like, from that day, he never tormented me in my sleep ever again, because I was able to like release. But that was just the start.
Yeah.
Right. That was the start. And then it was like, okay, now we need to take steps into really grieving, really mourning the loss. What do you think you've lost? What do you feel like you'll never get back? It's just like, so dealing with that, like, I feel like I lost my father. Is unfair. Why? I don't understand. I don't even know what it means to be a man. I'm supposed to be Thomas More boy, and I feel like it was stripped from me, and like, I'm not even close to but I had to get all those out for somebody to then help me walk through the process of like, okay, but can you look back? What did your dad teach you while he was here? What does fathering look like to you now? Like, what do you want? I want somebody to that I can trust with my heart to help me understand how to be accountable and to learn from. And it's like, well, God can do that for you now. It doesn't have like, and so it was helping me like, okay, I can take steps, but you can't take steps that you don't even know what process you're walking into, right? And so somebody had to look at me and be asking me these very specific questions and then help me be like, okay, you need to more, you cannot get that here. Face the reality of that. Deal with that. If you need to cry here for a moment, let's cry. Let's deal with that. Your dad is gone. He was broken. There's nothing to do with you. Lament about what he was going through. It's not about you. And it helped me because it's like, oh my goodness, like it's not about me. When I actually started thinking about it, like praying, like, God, praying for his soul, like how broken he was, how much he was going through, so saddened by his depression. Like it did something in me, you know, like it stirred in a way that was like, I'm not mad at him anymore. I'm sad.
Yeah.
I was like sad that he went through that. I didn't know. I'm like, Lord, I never want to be in a place to be in a relationship with people that they can't feel like they can't share with me what's going on in their life.
Yeah.
So it was transforming me because my prayers had changed from I don't want to be anything like him to God, I don't want anyone else to have to experience feeling alone. What must it have been like to be a Black man growing up in the South? Everybody's telling him he's going to be nothing but a sharecropper. But he's a dream. He's a chef. He builds homes. He is a creative. He lights up the room. And it feel like everywhere you go, somebody's dimming your light. I can only imagine what that would be like for me to deal with that. And it helped me to then, like walking through that was just super helpful, but you need someone to be able to walk you through that and then allow you to mourn through all the questions and all the hard things and like really go through the process. Mourning should always look like growth at the end of the day. If you find yourself in a process where you are not growing, you're not grieving. You're not grieving well. It's like school. It's like you go through, you know how you go through school and you ask questions you take tests, you go through those things, and next thing you know, you're like, wait, I'm a whole graduate. I didn't graduate. Like you just go to school and you think it's just like this, 12 years of the same thing over and over again, and but no, there's a matriculation. You keep going through this process and you end up having graduated. Also, you know how to study, you know how to ask questions. It's not just like school's like, oh, I'm never going to use this algebra again. It's not like that. It's like, no, but my mind now knows how to deduce things. My mind knows how to process questions and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? And so
I know exactly what you're saying. I also know that at least I feel as though I haven't fully graduated, period.
Yeah.
Full facts. I know that I have grown. We've made some levels.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yes.
But graduation, no. And I do think it's because I don't know if I have truly taken the time to go through every bit and piece. And I also would then have to address the other losses because I know you know this. After you deal with a loss and then another loss happens and it feels like almost you have to start the process again, but it's compounding actually because whatever you haven't addressed with the other loss, it's going to come up with this loss too. I know that that's something that I thank God for therapy, therapist, I love you. Because it's something that's going to come up. We're going to have to walk through it because I think it affects some of my decisions today. We're not an emotional breakdown mess anymore, but I'm still very aware of death and steps that you need to take as far as your life, decisions you're making. Are you being a benefit to yourself as well as the people around you? Or are you setting yourself up to leave someone lonely and destitute and broken and needing to fix themselves? And I'm very aware that I don't want to do that to anyone else, period. And I appreciate, one, just how you're sharing your story, especially in just the fact of the fathering part. You actually said that one of your proudest roles is to be a husband and a father, and to know that you had to go through that healing process to feel like you could be a father and father well. And I can really appreciate what you went through to get here, and knowing that everyone's journey is going to require that kind of work.
Yeah,
but it's doable.
It is doable, right? I mean, and there's other layers of loss there. I think about Father's Day now. I'm still think through, man, I wish my dad could see me. When he died at 39, so when I turned 39, it was like another layer of I'm the same age as him, and he never lived past this. And like, what is, and again, more layers. And it's when you talk about graduation, I wouldn't even frame it that way, but like, it's like algebra 1 and algebra 2. It's like you get to the next level, and the answer, when you start to trying to get to the answers and get to the solution, it starts the same. Like the fundamentals never change. And so even though it feels like a harder process or a new layer of it, you're not starting over. It's not necessarily compounding. It's just now you're not starting from a different place. It's just like, okay, no, but I know how to start, and I know how to break this, how to factor this down. Okay, and now I can deal with this and deal with this layer. And so when another one comes, it's just like for me at least, it's another layer. And so my mourning doesn't look the same as it did when I was 19. Doesn't mean I'm not mourning. I'm actually am mourning. I'm not coping anymore. I'm actually like, no, I'm in the process, factored it down. And so now when this piece comes in, it starts here now. It doesn't start up here. It starts at this level. And I know how to I know how to break this down. I know how to actually deal with this new layer of pain. And then I know how to ask questions. I'm like, man, bring it. I know how to bring it to somebody and say, man, I have a lot of fear. I didn't realize I was going to walk into fear of an anxiety at 39 because I didn't see my dad live it out past then. And so I've stopped dreaming. And so then I had to deal with that. But if I didn't have a place to share that would have just been me coping through the rest of my life. And what you would have seen as a friend is, man, Jeremy's not really doing anything. That would have just been the fruit. But the root of that would have been bitterness and fear and doubt from unprocessed emotions in my soul. And so, so when I say graduate, I just mean like, man, I've now got the tools. I've gotten all the tools, and I can go out into the world and be productive in this. That's what I mean by that.
I love that. Really, I do, because to me, you're a walking example of how it should look. And not to put like burden and pressure on you, no. just the simple fact that you are someone who is not trying to be perfect or look like you have it all together. You're just saying that I now have these tools and I'm willing to share these tools. So I know that we are running out of time, and this is a topic that we could literally discuss
seriously
for days.
Yeah.
But I just once again say thank you for what you have shared.
Yeah.
The tools that you shared, I'm definitely going to be taking this to my therapist because I'm realizing we need a few more steps to go through. But for anyone else who is dealing with this or not dealing with this and need to start, one, I'm going to add into the description some links, some resources for you. Any resources that Jeremy shares specifically for even tips on how to start this process for yourself, where to recognize where you're at. I'll include that there. But I just encourage you. I encourage you to sit with yourself and take a deep breath, take a deep look to see, am I okay or am I just coping?
Mm-hmm.
If you feel tight, if you feel stuck, if you feel tormented, it's a sign. You need to really work on this because you're not operating in your fullness. With that being said, thanks again.
Yeah. I just want to say one more thing.
Please give it.
Healthy grieving leads to growth. I just feel like if people can walk away understanding, like, man, if I am seeing myself grow, then like you said, if I'm seeing yourself stuck, that means, man, the grieving process hasn't been healthy, or you maybe haven't started yet.
Yeah.
So.
And I also realized that to mean not just financial growth, not the superficial growth. You didn't just graduate, you just didn't do all the things.
Yeah.
How are you being as a human?
Yes.
Like in your heart, mind, and soul, how are you operating? And if you feel as though you're still operating very much, I have to hold it all together at all times, you're not growing.
Yeah.
And that means there's actually more for you.
Yes.
And that means that you might be causing harm that you're not aware of.
Yes. That's it.
Just because it's going to leak. At some point, you cannot hold it together. The floodgates will open.
Yep.
And yeah.
It's good.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks again. It's going to have to happen again.
Me. Yes.
Because there's so much more.
Off the tape, off the recording, we got to talk some more. For sure.
It's true. But once again, this is Tequila in Your Tea. I will say this because I really do mean this. Seriously, cheers to your journey. I'm cheersing to mine because I need to remember that my journey, even when it's good, bad, hard, in between, is still worth taking. So, cheers to your journey as well as mine. I will be sipping my tea one sip at a time.